2 weeks after Marcus's forced removal from the cabin, Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and crimson. In her hands was a newspaper article that Vincent had delivered that morning. The headline read, "Prominent Attorney Arrested in Bribery Scandal." Marcus's photograph stared back at her from beneath the damning words, his arrogant smile frozen in newsprint. Vincent had been thorough. Marcus wasn't just facing criminal charges for bribing judges and fixing cases. His law license was suspended, his assets frozen, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Even if he somehow avoided prison time, he would never again have the power or connections to hurt anyone. Sarah felt a profound sense of closure reading about his downfall. "Justice has many forms," Vincent said, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "Sometimes the legal system actually works." Over the past 2 weeks, their relationship had evolved into something Sarah never could have imagined. Vincent still ran his criminal enterprises, but he had also become her protector, her employer, and surprisingly, her friend. She had treated 3 more of his injured associates, each case reinforcing her value to his organization and her growing comfort with moral ambiguity. "There's something I need to tell you," Vincent said, settling into the chair beside her. "The cabin isn't the only property I own up here. I've been developing a legitimate business, a private medical clinic for people who need discretionary health care. Rich clients who want plastic surgery without publicity, politicians who need addiction treatment off the record, that sort of thing." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Legal patients for once?" "Completely legal." "Well, mostly legal." Vincent's smile was almost boyish. "I want you to run it. Full nursing supervisor position, excellent salary, complete autonomy over medical decisions. You'd still help my people when needed, but you'd also have legitimate work that uses your skills properly." The offer was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. A real job using her nursing degree, financial independence, and the protection of Vincent's organization. It was a chance to build something positive from the ashes of her old life. But there was something else in Vincent's expression, something that suggested his interest in her went beyond her professional skills. "There's more," Vincent continued. "My daughter Maria wants to meet you. She's heard about the nurse who's been helping our family, and she wants to thank you personally. She's studying to be a doctor at Columbia. I think you two would have a lot in common." The idea of meeting Vincent's daughter both thrilled and terrified Sarah. Maria represented Vincent's human side, the part of him that was a loving father rather than a dangerous criminal. If Sarah was going to build a life in this morally complex world, she needed to understand all aspects of the man who now controlled her fate. "What about the FBI investigation you mentioned?" Sarah asked. "Won't a medical clinic bring unwanted attention?" "Actually, it provides perfect cover. Federal agents see a legitimate business run by a domestic violence survivor who's grateful for my help getting back on her feet." Very heartwarming story, really. Vincent's tactical mind was always working, always planning 3 moves ahead. Plus, having you as the public face of the operation adds respectability. "You're clean, educated, sympathetic, everything I'm not." Sarah laughed despite herself. "You're using me as window dressing for money laundering?" "I prefer to think of it as giving you a platform to help people while helping myself. Everyone wins." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I know this isn't the life you planned. But you're good at this work, and you're stronger than you ever believed when you were with that lawyer. You could disappear tomorrow with enough money to start over anywhere, and I wouldn't stop you. But I hope you'll stay." The honesty in his voice caught Sarah off guard. Vincent was offering her a real choice, not the illusion of choice that Marcus had always provided. She could walk away from this world of moral compromise and criminal connections. But she could also stay and build something meaningful from the chaos that had brought them together. "Diego stopped by yesterday while you were in town," Sarah said. "He brought flowers and asked me to teach his sister some basic first aid. Apparently, word is spreading that Vincent Romano's nurse actually cares about her patients. Does that surprise you?" Vincent asked. "What surprises me is that I care about them too." Sarah folded the newspaper, symbolically closing the chapter of her life that had been dominated by Marcus's abuse. I never expected to find family among criminals, but that's what's happening here. These people look out for each other in ways that so-called respectable society never did. Vincent reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of a violent past. Family is what we make it, not what society tells us it should be. You saved Diego's life, which means you saved a piece of my daughter's heart? That makes you family. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah felt the last of her old fears dissolving. Marcus's power over her was broken forever, destroyed by a man who understood violence but chose to use it protectively rather than destructively. Vincent's world was dangerous and morally complicated, but it was also filled with loyalty, respect, and genuine care for the people within its borders. "I'll take the job," Sarah said finally. "But I have one condition, name it. When your daughter visits, I want to cook dinner for all of us. A real family meal in my grandmother's cabin." She would have liked that, her kitchen being used to bring people together instead of hiding them. Vincent's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less dangerous. "Rose would be proud of what you've become. Sarah, you found your strength in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely people. That takes courage that can't be taught." As they sat together on the porch, planning Sarah's new clinic and discussing Vincent's daughter's upcoming visit, Sarah realized that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources. She had fled to this cabin seeking escape from one man's cruelty and instead found protection from another man's complex version of honor. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she might have dreamed of as a young woman, but it was real and it was hers for the first time in years. Sarah Martinez was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by people who valued her strength instead of trying to destroy it. The abandoned cabin had become a home, the dangerous stranger had become family, and the terrified victim had become a woman powerful enough to save lives and build her own destiny. Sometimes the best endings are the ones that look nothing like what you expected but feel exactly like what you needed. Elena Volkov never imagined that her childhood spent in Moscow would save her life in downtown Chicago. The 28-year-old translator worked for a small international business firm, helping American companies communicate with Russian clients. Her days were usually filled with boring contracts and business meetings. But on this particular Tuesday evening, everything changed. She had just finished a late meeting at the Millennium Hotel and was walking to the parking garage when she heard angry voices echoing from the shadows. Elena's Russian was perfect, thanks to her grandmother who had raised her for 10 years in Russia before she returned to America. The voices were speaking rapidly in Russian, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "He betrayed us, Victor," one man said harshly. "The shipment was supposed to arrive yesterday. Now the police are asking questions." "I know, Dmitri," another voice replied. "But killing him won't solve our problem. We need to find out who else knows about our operation." Elena pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her heart pounding. She recognized the accent immediately. These weren't just any Russians. These were men from the criminal underworld, the kind her grandmother had whispered about in fearful tones during those childhood years in Moscow, through the gap between. 2 cars, she could see 3 men in expensive suits surrounding a 4th man who was on his knees, bleeding from his nose. The man in the center was clearly the leader. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to cut through the dim garage lighting. This had to be Victor, and Elena could tell by the way the others deferred to him that he was someone very important and very dangerous. "Please," the kneeling man begged in accented English. "I can explain. The contact at the port, he got scared when he saw the federal agents. I had no choice but to abort the pickup." Victor's expression remained stone cold. "Fear is a luxury we cannot afford in this business, Alexei. You cost us $3 million and put our entire Chicago operation at risk." Elena knew she should run, should get as far away from this scene as possible, but her feet seemed frozen to the ground. She had read about the Russian Mafia in Chicago. Newspapers, but seeing them in person was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. The leader pulled out a gun and pointed it at the kneeling man's head. You will tell us everything you know about the federal investigation, or your family in Brighton Beach will receive a very unpleasant visit. No, please, Alexei cried. My daughter, she's only 16. She has nothing to do with this. That's when Elena made the biggest mistake of her life. Without thinking, she gasped audibly. The sound echoed through the garage like a gunshot. All 4 men turned toward her hiding spot immediately. Before she could move, 2 of them were already running in her direction. Elena tried to run, but her high heels betrayed her. She stumbled and fell, scraping her hands on the rough concrete. What do we have here? Victor's voice was calm but deadly as his men dragged Elena from behind the pillar. She found herself face to face with the most dangerous man in Chicago, possibly in all of America. Please, she whispered in English. I didn't see anything. I was just trying to get to my car. Victor studied her carefully, his cold blue eyes examining every detail of her appearance. You were hiding behind that pillar for at least 5 minutes. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you saw nothing. One of his men, a stocky man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. Boss, we should just get rid of her. She's a witness. But Victor held up his hand. Not so fast, Dmitri. Let's find out what our little spy knows first. He stepped closer to Elena, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of cigarettes. What's your name? Elena's mind raced. She could lie, but something told her that this man would see through any deception immediately. Elena, she whispered. Elena what? Elena Morrison? She used her stepfather's name, hoping to hide her Russian heritage. Victor's eyes narrowed. Morrison? That's not a Russian name. I'm American, Elena said quickly. I don't speak Russian. That's when Victor began speaking to her in rapid Russian, testing her. You understand every word I'm saying, don't you? Your accent when you gasped was not American. You're Russian, or at least you lived in Russia for many years. Elena tried to maintain her innocent expression, but she could feel her composure cracking under his intense stare. I think our little friend is lying to us, Victor said to his men, still speaking in Russian. Should we teach her the price of dishonesty? Without thinking, Elena responded in perfect Russian. I'm not lying about my name. Morrison is my stepfather's name. But you're right, I lived in Moscow until I was 18. The garage fell completely silent. Victor's eyebrows rose in surprise, and his men exchanged glances. Elena immediately realized her fatal error. Interesting, Victor said, a dangerous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. So you do speak Russian, fluently, in fact. Better than some of my own men. He circled around her slowly, like a predator examining its prey. Tell me, Elena Morrison, what else are you lying about? Nothing, Elena said, switching back to English. I work as a translator downtown. I help American businesses communicate with Russian companies. That's all. A translator, Victor repeated thoughtfully. How convenient. Dmitri, what are the odds that a Russian-speaking translator just happens to overhear our private conversation? Not good, boss, Dmitri replied. Sounds like either the worst luck in the world or the best setup I've ever seen. Elena's heart sank as she realized they thought she was some kind of spy or undercover agent. You're wrong, she pleaded. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I work for Morrison International Business Solutions. You can check? Victor pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Within minutes, he had apparently verified her employment, but his expression remained suspicious. Your story checks out, he said finally. But that doesn't mean you're not working for someone else on the side. The FBI has been very creative in their recruitment methods lately. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. She was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. These men would never believe she was just an innocent bystander, and they certainly couldn't let her go knowing what she had heard. Victor seemed to make a decision. Bring her to my office, he ordered his men. We need to have a longer conversation. Elena barely slept that night. Every sound in her apartment building made her jump. Every car that passed on the street below could contain Victor's men watching her. She sat by her window until dawn, thinking about her grandmother's stories and trying to remember details that had seemed unimportant at the time. Nadia had told her many tales during those cold Moscow evenings. Stories that young Elena had assumed were just exciting fiction. But now she realized they were lessons disguised as entertainment. Stories about people who survived impossible situations by being smarter than their enemies. By gathering information, by making allies in unexpected places. The key to survival, little Elena, her grandmother had said, is never to be exactly what people think you are. When morning came, Elena forced herself to go to work as if nothing had happened. Morrison International Business Solutions occupied a small office suite in downtown Chicago, where Elena worked with 3 other translators and 2 administrative staff. Her boss, Robert Morrison, was a kind man who had married her mother when Elena was in college. "You look tired," said Maria Santos, the Spanish translator who worked at the desk next to Elena's. "Are you feeling okay?" Elena managed a weak smile. "Just couldn't sleep. Too much coffee yesterday." She tried to focus on her work, translating a contract for a company that imported Russian steel products. But every time her phone buzzed with a message or email, her heart raced. She kept expecting federal agents to walk through the door or Victor's men to call with new demands. Around noon, her phone rang. The number was blocked. "Hello, Elena." Victor's voice was unmistakable. "I trust you slept well?" Elena stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. "What do you want?" "I want you to be very careful about what you say right now. This call is being monitored, but not by my people. Do you understand?" Elena's blood ran cold. If federal agents were listening to their conversation, anything she said could be used against her later. But if she didn't cooperate with Victor, she might not live to face federal charges. "I understand," she said carefully. "Good. I need you to research something for me using your access to international business databases. I want to know which American companies have recently started or stopped doing business with. Russian firms based in Brighton Beach, New York." Elena knew that Brighton Beach was the heart of the Russian immigrant community in New York and likely the center of Victor's East Coast operations. He was asking her to help identify potential informants or competitors. "That's not really the type of research my company does," Elena said. "Make it the type of research your company does," Victor replied coldly. "You have until tomorrow evening. We'll call you with instructions on how to deliver the information." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, realizing that she was now actively being drawn into Victor's criminal enterprise. But she also noticed something important about the call. Victor had warned her that federal agents were listening, which meant he either had sources inside law enforcement or sophisticated surveillance equipment of his own. That afternoon, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going straight home after work, she drove to the Chicago Public Library. She used one of their public computers to research federal laws regarding cooperation with criminal investigations. What she learned both terrified and encouraged her. If she was already under federal surveillance, it meant the authorities suspected her of criminal involvement. But it also meant they might be willing to protect her if she provided useful information. The key was making contact with the right people in the right way. Elena also used the library computer to research Viktor Kozlov, using the name she had heard in the garage. What she found shocked her. Viktor was not just any Russian criminal. He was allegedly the head of one of the most sophisticated crime syndicates in North America. With operations spanning from Chicago to New York to Miami, he was suspected in dozens of murders, but had never been convicted of anything more serious than tax evasion. More importantly, according to several news articles, federal authorities had been trying to infiltrate his organization for over 5 years without success. Victor was known for his paranoia and his ability to identify and eliminate undercover agents. Elena realized she was in a unique position. Victor trusted her just enough to use her, but not enough to bring her fully into his inner circle. This might give her opportunities that traditional undercover agents could never have. When she got home that evening, Elena found a surprise waiting for her. Agent Sarah Chun of the FBI was sitting in the lobby of her apartment building, reading a newspaper. "Miss Morrison?" Agent Chun was a small Asian woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a professional manner. I'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred last night at the Millennium Hotel parking garage. Elena's heart pounded, but she tried to appear calm. I don't know what you're talking about. We received reports of gunshots and found evidence of an altercation. Your car was in the garage at the time, according to the parking records. Elena realized she had no choice but to acknowledge being there. I heard some loud noises, but I just got to my car and left as quickly as possible. I thought maybe someone was setting off firecrackers. Agent Chun studied Elena's face carefully. Would you mind coming with me to answer a few more questions? It would really help our investigation. During the 20-minute ride to the federal building, Elena wrestled with an impossible decision. Should she tell Agent Chun everything and hope for federal protection? Or should she continue playing both sides and risk getting deeper into Victor's world? The FBI interview room was exactly what Elena expected from watching television shows. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a large mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Agent Chun was joined by Agent Michael Rodriguez, a tall man with graying hair who looked like he had been chasing criminals for decades. Elena, Agent Chun began, we know more about last night than you might think. We've been investigating Viktor Kozlov's organization for a very long time. What we need to know is whether you were there by accident or design. Elena made her choice. It was an accident, but it's not anymore. She told them everything. The conversations she had overheard being captured by Victor's men, the intimidating meeting in his office, and the phone call demanding she research American companies working with Russian firms. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Elena, what you're describing makes you a victim of extortion and intimidation. We can offer you protection if you're willing to cooperate with our investigation. What kind of cooperation? Elena asked. We want you to give Victor the information he's asking for, Agent Chun explained. But we'll control what information you provide. We can use this opportunity to feed him false intelligence and track his responses. Elena felt like she was stepping off a cliff into darkness. And if he finds out I'm working with you? The 2 agents exchanged glances. That's a risk, Agent Rodriguez admitted. Viktor Kozlov doesn't leave loose ends. But Elena, you're already in danger whether you help us or not. At least this way, you have a chance to help bring down a very dangerous criminal organization. Elena thought about her grandmother's stories, about ordinary people who had found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and survived by being clever and brave. What do you need me to do? She asked. Elena spent the next day carefully crafting the research report Victor had demanded. But every piece of information had been approved by Agent Chun. The FBI had provided her with a mix of real and false data designed to test Victor's intelligence, network, and potentially expose his contacts within legitimate businesses. The hardest part was acting normal at work while carrying the weight of such dangerous secrets. Elena found herself jumping at every sound and studying every face that passed by her office window. Was that man in the coffee shop across the street watching her? Was the woman who asked for directions actually a federal agent providing backup protection? When Victor called that evening, Elena was ready. Do you have the information I requested? His voice was as cold as ever. Yes, there are 6 American companies that have significantly changed their business relationships with Russian firms in Brighton Beach over the past 6 months. Meet me at Navy Pier in 1 hour. Come alone and bring everything you found. Elena arrived at Navy Pier as the sun was setting over Lake Michigan. The popular tourist destination was still busy with visitors, which made her feel slightly safer. She spotted Victor immediately, standing near the Ferris wheel with 2 bodyguards positioned nearby but trying to look like casual tourists. You've done well, Victor said as he reviewed the documents Elena had prepared. This information confirms some of our suspicions and reveals some new problems we need to address. Elena watched his face carefully as he read, trying to gauge which pieces of information interested him most. Agent Chen had coached her on what to look for and how to remember important details for later debriefing. There's something else I need from you, Victor continued. My organization is planning a significant expansion of our Chicago operations. We need someone who can help us communicate with American business partners without raising suspicion. What kind of business partners? Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Legitimate companies that can help us move money and merchandise through proper channels. Having a professional translator who already works with international businesses would be very valuable. Elena realized that Victor was offering her a permanent position in his criminal enterprise. The FBI had prepared her for this possibility, but it still felt terrifying to hear it directly. I don't know if I'm qualified for that kind of work, she said carefully. Victor's smile was sharp. Oh, but you are. In fact, you're more qualified than you realize. He handed her a manila envelope. This contains information about your real qualifications. Elena opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs and documents she had never seen before. Pictures of her grandmother meeting with men in suits, official-looking papers with government seals, and transcripts of conversations in Russian. Your grandmother was more than just a secretary who helped a few families defect, Victor explained. She was a key asset in a major intelligence operation that compromised Soviet military secrets for over a decade. She saved the information about her activities and hid it very carefully before she died. Elena studied the documents, her mind racing. How did you get these? When we investigated your background, we discovered that your grandmother left certain materials in a safety deposit box in Moscow. The bank records showed regular payments from your trust fund to maintain the box even after her death. We acquired the contents yesterday. Elena felt like the world was spinning around her. Her grandmother had been living a double life far more complex than Elena had ever imagined. The point is, Victor continued, you come from a family with experience in intelligence work. It's in your blood. And now you're going to use those inherited skills to help my organization. Victor's phone buzzed and he answered it immediately. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Russian, but Elena caught enough to understand that something had gone wrong. We need to leave, Victor announced. There's been a development that requires my immediate attention. As they walked quickly toward the parking area, Elena noticed that Victor's bodyguards had become much more alert, constantly scanning the crowd and speaking into hidden microphones. What's happening? Elena asked. Federal agents raided one of our warehouses an hour ago, Victor replied grimly. They found merchandise we couldn't afford to lose and arrested 3 of my people. Elena's heart pounded. Had the FBI used her information to plan the raid? If so, Victor might already suspect her involvement. Victor stopped suddenly and turned to face Elena directly. It's interesting that this raid happened just one day after I asked you to research American companies working with Russian businesses. Don't you think that's quite a coincidence? Elena forced herself to maintain eye contact. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that someone has been feeding information to federal authorities. Someone who has access to our plans and operations. Victor's voice was deadly quiet. Someone who might have been turned against us very recently. Elena felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. Victor, if you think I'm working with the police, you're wrong. I gave you exactly the information you asked for. Yes, you did, Victor agreed. But the question is whether that information was designed to help us or to help them track us. One of Victor's bodyguards approached and whispered something in his ear. Victor's expression darkened further. It seems the federal agents who conducted tonight's raid had very specific intelligence about our security procedures and the location of our most sensitive materials, Victor said. The kind of detailed information that would require inside knowledge. Elena realized she was in immediate danger. Victor was clearly suspecting her involvement, and his reputation for dealing with suspected informants was well known. Victor, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, I understand why you're suspicious. But think about this logically. I've been a translator for boring business clients my entire career. I don't have access to information about your security procedures or warehouse locations. I researched exactly what you asked me to research, nothing more. Victor studied her for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he spoke. You're right that you don't have access to that information yet, but someone does, and I'm going to find out who. He gestured to his bodyguards. Escort Elena to her car. Make sure she gets home safely. As Elena drove home, escorted by one of Victor's black SUVs, she realized that her situation had become infinitely more dangerous. Victor was actively hunting for the informant in his organization, and she was now at the top of his suspect list. But she had also learned something crucial during their conversation. Victor had mentioned specific details about the raid that suggested he had sources inside law enforcement providing him with information about federal operations. This was intelligence that Agent Chun would desperately want to know. Elena parked in her building's garage and took the elevator to her apartment, acutely aware that Victor's men were probably watching her building now. As she unlocked her door, she wondered if this would be the last normal evening of her life. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. Delete after reading. Sleep well." Elena opened her laptop and found an encrypted message from Agent Chun. The message was brief, but chilling. "Victor knows about the raid. We believe he has law enforcement contacts. Your safety is now our primary concern. Do not attempt to contact us directly. Wait for our signal." Elena deleted the message and sat in her dark apartment, realizing that she was now completely alone in the most dangerous game of her life. 3 days passed without any contact from Victor or the FBI. Elena went through the motions of her normal routine, translating contracts and attending meetings, but every moment felt like she was walking on thin ice. She noticed new faces in the coffee shop across from her office and cars that seemed to follow her home, but she couldn't tell if they belonged to Victor's surveillance team or federal agents. Providing protection, on Thursday morning, everything changed. Elena arrived at work to find Robert Morrison waiting in her office with a grim expression. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I received a very interesting phone call yesterday from someone claiming to represent a major Russian industrial company. They want to hire our firm for a long-term translation contract, but they specifically requested you." Elena's stomach dropped. "What company?" "Baltic Steel Industries," Robert replied. "Have you heard of them?" Elena knew she hadn't worked with any company by that name, which meant this was almost certainly Victor making his next move. "No, I don't think so." "What did they want?" "They want you to relocate to their Chicago offices for 6 months to help them establish American business partnerships. They're offering triple your current salary and full relocation expenses." Elena realized this was Victor's way of bringing her completely under his control. If she accepted the position, she would be working directly for his organization with no way to contact federal authorities without being detected. "I'm not interested in relocating," Elena said carefully. Robert looked surprised. "Elena, this is an incredible opportunity. The money alone would change your life. Are you sure you want to turn it down?" Before Elena could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Baltic Steel Industries. "Elena Morrison," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good morning, Elena." Victor's voice was smooth and professional. "I trust Robert has explained our generous offer. I wanted to speak with you personally about the position." Elena glanced at Robert, who was clearly impressed that the potential client was calling directly. "Could I call you back in a few minutes? I'd like to discuss this privately." "Of course. But Elena, I do hope you'll accept our offer. It would be very unfortunate if we had to look for alternative arrangements." The threat was subtle but clear. Elena hung up and turned to Robert. "I need to think about this opportunity. Could you give me the rest of the day to consider it?" After Robert left, Elena sat alone in her office trying to figure out her next move. She couldn't accept Victor's offer without putting herself in mortal danger, but refusing might be equally dangerous. More importantly, she had no way to contact Agent Chun without potentially exposing their relationship to Victor's surveillance. That's when Elena remembered something her grandmother had taught her. During their long talks in Moscow, Nadia had explained how intelligence operatives used dead drops to communicate when direct contact was too risky. They would leave messages in predetermined locations where their contacts could retrieve them safely. Elena spent her lunch break walking through Lincoln Park, the neighborhood where she lived. She tried to think like her grandmother would have, looking for locations that would allow secure communication. Finally, she settled on a plan. Elena had noticed that the same homeless man sat near the entrance to Lincoln Park Zoo every day with a small cardboard sign asking for donations. She had given him money several times over the past few months. This afternoon, instead of just dropping coins in his cup, she slipped him a $20 bill wrapped around a small note. "Could you do me a favor?" she asked quietly. "If anyone asks if you've seen Elena from the apartment building on Clark Street, tell them I come here to feed the ducks at exactly 5:30 every evening." The man nodded and pocketed the money and note. Elena hoped that Agent Chin's people were still watching her and would notice the change in her routine. At exactly 5:30 that evening, Elena stood by the duck pond in Lincoln Park. She had been there for only a few minutes when a jogger stopped nearby to stretch and check her watch. "Keep stretching. And don't look at me directly," the woman said quietly. It was Agent Chun, disguised in running clothes with her hair pulled back and wearing sunglasses. Elena continued tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks while she spoke. "Victor offered me a job with a company called Baltic Steel Industries. I think it's a front for his organization." "We know," Agent Chun replied, continuing her stretching routine. "We've been monitoring their communications since yesterday. Victor is planning something major, and he wants you inside his operation before he moves forward. What should I do?" "Accept the job," Agent Chun said. "But we're going to modify the situation significantly. Tomorrow morning, Baltic Steel Industries is going to receive a visit from federal tax auditors. Nothing major, just a routine inspection that will require them to delay your start date by 2 weeks. Elena felt a chill despite the warm evening air. 2 weeks to do what? 2 weeks for us to identify Victor's law enforcement contact and neutralize that threat. 2 weeks to prepare you for deep undercover work in ways we couldn't before. And 2 weeks for Victor to get comfortable enough with the idea of bringing you into his operation that he doesn't suspect anything when you finally start." Agent Chin finished her stretching and prepared to continue her jog. "Elena, what you're about to do is incredibly dangerous. If Victor discovers you're working with us, he won't hesitate to kill you. Are you sure you want to continue?" Elena thought about her grandmother's stories about ordinary people who had risked everything to do the right thing. "Yes, I'm sure." "Good. Tomorrow morning, call Victor and tell him you're accepting the Baltic Steel position, but that federal tax auditors are delaying everything. Act frustrated about the bureaucratic complications. We'll handle the rest." Agent Chun jogged away, leaving Elena alone with the ducks and her racing thoughts. The next morning, Elena called Victor as instructed. His reaction to the news about the tax audit was exactly what Agent Chun had predicted. "Typical American bureaucracy," Victor said with obvious irritation. "These delays cost us money and momentum. How long will this audit take?" "They said approximately 2 weeks," Elena replied. "I'm sorry, Victor. I know this complicates your plans." "It's not your fault," Victor said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Use this time to prepare yourself for your new responsibilities. Study everything you can about international steel trading and American import regulations." Over the following 2 weeks, Elena's life became a carefully orchestrated performance. During the day, she continued her normal work while secretly meeting with federal agents who taught her surveillance techniques, communication protocols, and how to identify and document criminal activities without being detected. In the evenings, she researched steel trading and import regulations as Victor had requested, but she also studied everything she could find about Victor's organization and its known associates, the most important lesson Agent Chun taught her was how to think like her grandmother had during the Cold War. "You're not just an informant," Agent Chun explained. "You're an intelligence operative working deep cover in hostile territory. Everything you do, every conversation you have, every decision you make has to be calculated to maintain your cover while gathering the information we need." As the 2 weeks came to an end, Elena realized that her quiet life as a translator was over forever. Whatever happened next, she would never again be just an ordinary citizen caught in extraordinary circumstances. She was now a player in a dangerous game, where the stakes were life and death. And the only way to survive was to be smarter and more careful than everyone around her. On Sunday evening before her Monday start date with Baltic Steel Industries, Elena received a final message from Agent Chun. Remember everything we taught you. Trust no one completely. And never forget that your grandmother survived because she never stopped thinking 3 moves ahead. Elena deleted the message and prepared for the most dangerous phase of her new life. Elena's first day at Baltic Steel Industries began in a downtown Chicago office building that looked completely legitimate. The 20th floor had been converted into a sophisticated business operation with conference rooms, computer workstations, and even a reception area with fresh flowers and expensive artwork. But Elena's trained eyes, sharpened by 2 weeks of federal training, noticed the subtle signs that this was not an ordinary business. The windows had been modified with special glass that would prevent electronic surveillance from outside. Several of the employees carried themselves like security personnel rather than office workers. And the computers she glimpsed had multiple encrypted communication programs running. Victor greeted Elena personally on her first morning, dressed in an impeccable business suit and playing the role of a successful international executive. "Welcome to Baltic Steel Industries," he said warmly, as if they had never met before in a dark parking garage. "I'm confident you'll find our international operations both challenging and rewarding." Elena was introduced to her colleagues, a mix of legitimate business professionals and criminals who were clearly part of Victor's organization. Her supervisor was Anya Petrov, a sharp-eyed Russian woman in her 40s who immediately tested Elena's knowledge of steel trading terminology and import regulations. "Victor tells me you have extensive experience with Russian business culture," Anya said during their first private meeting. "That will be very valuable as we expand our American operations." Elena spent her first week learning the daily operations of what was actually a sophisticated money laundering and smuggling enterprise disguised as a steel trading company. Baltic Steel did conduct some legitimate business, but the real profits came from moving illegal merchandise and cash through carefully constructed networks of shell companies and corrupt officials. Elena's role was to translate communications between the Russian and American sides of the operation, but she quickly realized this gave her access to incredibly sensitive information. She learned about shipments arriving at various ports, payments being made to government inspectors, and plans for expanding operations into new cities. Most importantly, Elena discovered the identity of Victor's law enforcement contact. During a meeting she was asked to translate, Victor spoke with someone called Detective Murphy, who provided advance warning about federal investigations and raid schedules. Elena used the communication techniques Agent Chun had taught her to pass information to the FBI without being detected. She left coded messages in the bathroom of a nearby coffee shop and used specific phrases during her monthly checkups with her dentist that signaled she had new intelligence to report. 3 weeks into her employment with Baltic Steel, Victor called Elena into his private office for what he described as a special assignment. "Elena, your work has been exceptional," Victor said, offering her a seat across from his desk. "Your translations have helped us avoid several costly mistakes, and your knowledge of American business practices has been invaluable." "Thank you," Elena replied, though she felt a chill at his tone. "I have a particularly sensitive project that requires your skills," Victor continued. "We've discovered that someone in our organization has been providing information to federal authorities. Someone with access to our most confidential operations." Elena's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "That's terrible. How can I help?" Victor slid a folder across his desk. "I want you to translate these intercepted communications. They're recordings of phone conversations between our suspected informant and their federal contact." Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were transcripts of conversations in English, along with audio files on a secure tablet. As she began reading, she realized with growing horror that these were records of communications between Agent Chun and an unknown informant, but the conversations weren't with Elena. They were with someone else inside Victor's organization. Someone who had been providing information for months before Elena ever became involved. "Do you recognize the voice on the recordings?" Victor asked, watching Elena's face carefully. Elena listened to several audio files, using her translation skills to analyze accents and speech patterns. The informant was clearly a native Russian speaker with excellent English, someone who had been in America for many years. The accent suggests someone from the Moscow region who has lived in the United States for at least a decade, Elena said carefully. The vocabulary choices indicate higher education, possibly in business or law. Victor nodded approvingly. Those details match our suspicions. We believe the informant is Sergei Volkov, our legal counsel. He's been with our organization for 8 years and has access to exactly the type of information that has been compromised. Elena realized she was being asked to help Victor identify and eliminate the real FBI informant. If she succeeded, an innocent person would die. If she failed or refused, Victor might discover her own role as an informant. "What do you want me to do?" Elena asked. "I want you to call Sergei into a meeting tomorrow morning," Victor replied. "Tell him we need legal advice about a new shipping contract. During the meeting, I want you to listen carefully to his voice and confirm whether he matches the voice on these recordings." Elena spent that evening in agony, trying to figure out how to protect Sergei without exposing herself. She couldn't contact Agent Chun directly without risking detection, and she couldn't refuse Victor's request without raising suspicion. Finally, Elena remembered another lesson from her grandmother's stories. Sometimes the best way to protect one person was to give the enemy a different target, someone who was already planning to escape. The next morning, Elena arrived at Baltic Steel early and used her access to the secure communication systems to send a message to Sergei's personal phone. Meeting with Victor postponed. Federal raid planned for this afternoon. Get out now. When Victor arrived and asked her to call Sergei for the meeting, Elena tried his office phone and cell phone multiple times. "He's not answering," Elena reported. "Should I try again later?" Victor's expression darkened. He made several phone calls in rapid Russian, growing more agitated with each conversation. "Sergei hasn't been seen since yesterday evening," Victor announced grimly. "His apartment is empty and his car is missing." Elena feigned surprise. "You think he ran?" "I think our suspected informant just confirmed his guilt by disappearing," Victor replied. That afternoon, federal agents raided 3 Baltic Steel warehouses simultaneously, seizing millions of dollars in illegal merchandise and arresting dozens of Victor's associates. But Victor himself, along with his core leadership team, had vanished hours before the raids began. Elena found herself in federal custody, officially arrested along with other Baltic Steel employees but secretly debriefed by Agent Chun in a secure facility outside Chicago. "You saved Sergei's life," Agent Chun told her. "He's been our primary source inside Victor's organization for 2 years. When you warned him about the meeting, he followed emergency protocols and entered witness protection. What happens now?" Elena asked. "Victor is gone, but his organization isn't completely destroyed," Agent Chun explained. "He'll try to rebuild, probably in a different city. You'll need to enter witness protection as well, at least until we can locate and arrest him." Elena thought about her quiet life as a translator, her small apartment in Lincoln Park, and her job at Morrison International Business Solutions. All of that was gone now, lost the moment she had gasped in a dark parking garage and spoken fluent Russian to a Mafia boss. But, as Elena prepared for her new life in witness protection, she realized that her grandmother's real legacy wasn't the documents Victor had found in a Moscow safety deposit box. It was the courage to do the right thing even when the cost was enormous, and the intelligence to survive in a world where ordinary people sometimes found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. 6 months later, Elena received word that Victor Kozlov had been arrested in Miami while trying to establish new operations in Florida. The evidence gathered during her time with Baltic Steel Industries, combined with Sergei's testimony, was enough to ensure Victor would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Elena was free to build a new life, but she would never forget the lessons she had learned about family secrets, moral courage, and the price of justice. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not by soldiers or police officers, but by translators who understood that words had the power to save lives or destroy them. Her grandmother had been right. Survival often depended on never being exactly what people thought you were.